20 years ago, Razorworks and Empire Interactive released a game called Total Immersion Racing. I was a 5-year-old at the time with a growing passion for racing cars and motorsport, so as I'm sure you can imagine, talking about this game brings back a lot of good memories. Nostalgia has such a big impact on your perspective of video games, but although that may influence how I feel about the Total Immersion experience, it's not the overall game itself that I want to talk about today. This title had a fairly modest car list, with the focus on GTs and prototypes giving it an endurance series flavour. At the time, they were simply a collection of modern racing cars, but as the years have gone by, some of them have secured legendary status. Others have simply been forgotten about, and with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that this car list contained a handful of absolute gems that many people will have forgotten ever existed. My job today is to tell you about these cars, sharing their stories and what it was that made them special, so that they won't simply be consigned to the history books. Total Immersion Racing contained 3 separate car classes: GT, GTS, and Pro. The career mode sees you sign a contract with a GT team, taking part in multi-class races to work your way through the ranks, eventually moving to a GTS team, and then finally signing a Pro contract. There was also a Challenges mode where you move your way through a host of different series to unlock your favourite cars. The first car you will come across is the 2002 Ekstrom & Wendlinger Abt Audi TT DTM car, which is one of those well known and renowned by racing fans. It's a similar story with the BMW M3 GTR, the car that seems to be the pick of the bunch in the GT class. This machine was driven in 2001 by Jorg Müller and JJ Leto in the GT class of the European Le Mans series, with the car also competitive over in the States in the American Le Mans series. The other 2 cars in TIR's GT class are a little bit more obscure. Firstly, we have the Noble M12 GTO. Launched in 2000, this was one of my favourite cars as a kid. I used to watch one competing in the Scottish Sprint Championship, and it became a dream of mine to own one day. Weirdly, the car appears in this 2002 game, despite having, as far as I can work out, no racing heritage at the time. I do wonder if it was a fictional interpretation of what a racing M12 would be like, or maybe one was already in production, we just didn't know it yet. An M12 would appear in the GT Cup class of the British GT Championship in 2004 with Roll Centre Racing. This car was derived from the performance version of the M12, called the GTO 3R, which had a 3-litre twin-turbo Ford engine. They did alright, picking up a number of class podiums along the way, but the car wouldn't return to the grid in 2005. A shame, because I think it's one of the coolest sports cars Britain has produced this century. The final car in the GT class is actually a bit older, and probably less recognisable than the Noble. This is the Quaife R4 GTS. And yes, this is the same Quaife that are known for developing drivetrain products such as gearboxes and differentials. They are less well known for their homemade GT1 spec racing car, however. Designed and built by Mike Quaife himself, this car competed in the top class of the British GT Championship in 1998 and 99. It had a 6-litre Ford V8 engine, but rather more interestingly, it was 4-wheel drive. The whole idea of this project was to showcase their own technology in drivetrain development. However, the car was fairly unreliable, and not super competitive either, meaning a best finish of 7th place, weirdly in its first ever outing at Silverstone. It is very interesting though, and to be fair to Quaife, the competition at the time in GT1 was fierce, with many entries backed by major manufacturers. This rare gem would return to the British GT fold in 2001 under new regulations, but that would be that. Another interesting and eclectic British racing car that has been kept alive through Total Immersion Racing. Moving on to GTS now, and here we find 5 cars. One is already considered a sports car legend, the McLaren F1 GTR. This is the long-tail version that arrived in 1997 with the same V12 BMW engine as its predecessor. Then we have a couple of slightly rarer cars, which many of you will probably still know about. The Panos Esperante GTR1 was another GT1 spec classic from the late 90s. Famous for having its engine in the front and looking like the Batmobile, this American monster was again powered by a 6-litre V8 Ford engine. The sound was thunderous, but I would argue not quite as epic as the next car. The British-built Lister Storm had a V12 Jaguar engine, derived from their Group C efforts a decade earlier. The car in this game appears to be the GT model, which competed in the GT2 class of the FIA GT Championship in the early 2000s. These 2 cars had less global success than the McLaren, but are undoubtedly fan favourites. The next car, however, is my own personal favourite, and I reckon with a bit more budget and time, could have been one of the greatest GT1-ish cars ever built. Unless you specifically watched British GT racing in 1999, you've probably never heard of it. I am talking about the Sintura S99. For me, one of the top 5 best looking sports cars ever made, without a shadow of a doubt. Powered by a V10 Judd engine and built by a small team in Evesham headed by Richard Austin, the Sintura turned up for the '99 British GT Championship, with limited testing and inevitable small team budget syndrome.
Is off! The Sintura has a massive accident!
The thing is though, this car was absolutely rapid. It almost looks like a Group C Mazda 787B and a Porsche 911 GT1 had a baby together. And then I'm thinking this baby maybe grew into what would become the Maserati MC12 in future. Sorry, I'm going off topic. Some teams at the time weren't super happy about this car, as it appeared to be as much of a dedicated prototype as it was a GT car, hence the GT1-ish comment earlier. Has anyone else heard of the Toyota GT1 or the Mercedes CLK GTR, by the way? They were GT1 cars. Nevertheless, this independent effort, piloted by Richard Dean and Kurt Luby, picked up 4 podiums from its 5 finishes, including a win at Silverstone. They even took the car to America for the penultimate round of the 1999 ALMS season at Laguna Seca. The car was as fast and as gorgeous as ever, but the heat prevented them from running at full chat. A failed attempt at a 2000 Le Mans entry followed, and with the lack of budget and GT1 regulations now very much in the past, the car quickly became a memory. This car and its design had the potential to be a world beater, but the restraints of a one-car, part-time team meant this was never realistically achievable. Considering the circumstances, I have to say the Sintura is very special indeed, and when I rediscovered it watching back coverage of late 90s British GT and ALMS, I quickly fell in love with it. There is one more car in the GTS class, and if you follow Japanese GT racing throughout the noughties, then you will know about this one. But if you didn't, like me, then you probably won't, as it never raced anywhere else. The Vemac RD320R was powered by a 3.2 litre V6 engine from the Honda NSX, and competed in the GT300 class of the Japanese GT Championship between 2002 and 2012. The car, run by R&D Sport, took the series by storm, winning round 2 on its racing debut. 2 more wins followed that season, and the team arrived at Suzuka for the finale as the championship leaders. Sadly, it wasn't to be, and they had to settle for a runners-up spot. An unsuccessful move to the top GT500 class followed, before a handful of VMACs rejoined GT300 when the series rebranded as Super GT in 2005. Multiple teams entered a variety of VMAC cars over the years, but this one never again reached the heights of the first season. 2012 would be the last year in the sport for this small Japanese sports car manufacturer, as regulation changes forced the smaller brands out to make way for more established names. The inclusion within TIR captured the car in its early stages of development, so this really was the VMAC at its peak. Pro is the top class within Total Immersion Racing, and features what we know as Le Mans prototypes. Mostly. More on that later. The game includes the top 3 cars of this period in terms of success. First of all, you have the BMW LMR, which used the same V12 engine as the McLaren F1 to win Le Mans in 1999. The winning car from the following 3 years is also included, the legendary Audi R8. And thirdly, we have the car that would win the race a year after this game was released, the Bentley Speed 8. None of these cars really need an introduction. You all know the stories. But what about the rest of the cars? Panos continued to play a major role in global endurance racing, as they launched their LMP1 Roadster S just before the turn of the century. They used a similar design philosophy as they had for their GT1 Esperante, putting the lump of an engine in the front. And it worked. With regular drivers David Brabham and Jan Magnussen, the car would have a lot of success over in the States, winning 8 American Le Mans Series races over the next 3 years, and, to a degree, taking the fight to BMW and then Audi. The iconic Stars and Stripes livery used in the game was the livery Panos used throughout the 2002 season. Another fairly successful but perhaps slightly less iconic machine is the Dome S101. Powered by a 4-litre V10 Judd engine similar to that in the Sintura, this car was one of the few that, on its day, could just about take the fight to Audi in terms of one-lap pace. It qualified 4th for the 2001 edition of the Le Mans 24 Hours, in the hands of Racing for Holland, being the only car to beat any of those dominant R8s. Outside of Le Mans, however, the team did gain a lot of success. Dome SC101s would finish 2nd and 3rd in the 2001 FIA Sports Car Championship, with the Racing for Holland team going on to win the title in both 2002 and 2003, headed by star driver Jan Lammers. This has to be one of the best LMP 900 cars outside of the more widely recognised major manufacturers. Next up is the first of the secret cars within the game. The Pilbeam MP84 was created in 1998 as a chassis suitable for LMP 675 endurance racing, which would become the LMP2 class in future years. Pilbeam is another small-scale British race car manufacturer, set up in the 70s by engineer and designer Mike Pilbeam. I'd say they're mostly known for their hill climb and sprint focused single-seaters, but over the years the company has produced a lot of interesting sports cars too. The MP84 was used by multiple teams in the Sports Racing World Cup series in 99 and 2000. The TIR livery comes from the Project 2000 squad, which entered the Donington round before a failed attempt to take on the fabled Race of 1000 Years at Adelaide. The car often ran with a V6 Nissan engine, and one MP84 did actually compete at Le Mans in 2001 with Rowan Racing. I say compete, they qualified last in class and retired in the opening 3 laps of the race. The same team and car would go on to win a round of the American and European Le Mans series at Donington, although their only competitor on this occasion didn't make it to the finish. Many other teams struggled to pick up any results with this car throughout the ALMS season, but back in Europe, the car did at least win 3 races in the FIA Sports Car Championship, and this time there was a decent field and genuine competition. In 2002, the year of this game's release, 4 MP84s planned to tackle the Daytona 24-hour, but none of them would start the race, and Buckingham Racing's outing at the 12 Hours of Sebring was the last for this particular car at the top level. A car that gained some success against other smaller manufacturers and teams, but was out of its depth against the big guns. Not in this game though. Its stats are actually better than the LMP 900 Le Mans winning cars, so clearly the developers wanted the hidden cars to feel special when you finally discovered them. The final car I want to talk about is the fastest prototype in the game. Weirdly, not the fastest car in the game because there's also a secret champ car you can unlock. Think of this one as a bonus Easter egg car for getting to the end of the game. It's a bit weird and out of place compared to everything else, but interesting nonetheless. So back to the final prototype. Some of you may not be aware that Lister Storm didn't just make GT cars. This Lister Storm LMP made its first real-life appearance in 2003. Its chassis was designed by Andy Thorby, the man also responsible for the design of the Panoz LMP07, the unsuccessful replacement for the aforementioned LMP1 Roadster S. The Lister was eye-catching to say the least, with a near 6-litre 530 brake horsepower V8 engine from a Corvette. This is cool, but could you imagine how awesome the V12 Jaguar would have been in this? It made its racing debut at the Sebring 12-hour race, and then entered Le Mans. Sadly, Jamie Campbell-Walter crashed the car during the Thursday qualifying session, and it would be the only car not to take the race start. Its fastest quali lap before the crash, however, would have been enough for a top 15 starting spot. The car would show its hand later in the year, again at Le Sarthe, but this time the Bugatti circuit for the one-off Le Mans 1000 km. It qualified P3, only 1.3 seconds off the pace of the leading Tom Christensen Audi R8. The car returned for the 24-hour the next year, finishing 24th, and would spend 3 seasons competing in the Le Mans Endurance Series, without much success. Lister's only outright win would come in the 6 Hours of Vallelunga Gold Cup race in 2004, albeit as the sole LMP 900 entry. After failing to finish the 2006 Le Mans 24-hour, its following outing at Donington would be its final encore. A gorgeous piece of engineering, and flashes of speed were present, but this car would never garner the cult following or success of its GT counterpart. For that reason, I have a bit of a soft spot for it. I genuinely think that Thorby's angular design looks sensational, up there with the prettiest of the era. You can actually draw some comparisons between the Lister LMP and Total Immersion Racing as a game. Yes, there were glimpses of potential, and those that did engage with it remember it fondly, but at the same time, the overall package just wasn't at the level it needed to be to take on the world beaters. Still, that doesn't stop me from wanting to talk about them, and reliving a little slice of my childhood in the process. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look at some of the most interesting, forgotten endurance race cars out there, and if you did, why don't you leave us a like? Don't forget to subscribe to the Traxion channel for more racing game content like this, and hit that notification bell to catch our videos as they are released. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, keep it pinned, and have a great day.